Hi again, YouTube. This is Tim Cain on time estimation. So a little bit of production sort of talk here. We usually do design, but this is a good production one. Time estimation sucks. It is very hard because in a lot of cases, even if you've worked on a system before, you have not worked on a system with this specific set of parameters and needs and design and code architecture. Even if you're working on a similar game with a similar system, maybe the code architecture is so different that the time estimation is vastly different because you need to worry about others, affecting other systems like that too. So if time estimation was easy to do, we wouldn't see delays in games. I'll just put it up like that.
Hi everyone, it's me, Tim.
Hi, Tim.
Today I want to talk about
Tim.
time estimation. Received a lot of requests over the last year for people asking for a good method to estimate tasks because this is a frequent contentious point between people and either the people they manage or their managers, where time estimates are just off and then upset situations happen.
Milestone delays, production delays, increase in budget. Maybe you didn't expect it would take so long. You only have one 3D artist. Now you need two because you might be able to reach the milestone, but only with another 3D artist on board. So you have to outsource. That adds money and time to bring somebody into the project. That assumes that you have a good pipeline for the art that can enable using an outsourced artist just innately like that. Then you have different issues with managers who expect really easy to read charts, and so they'll use like different metrics. So maybe it's Jira points. How many points is this task? But points is a measure of complexity usually, not time. So but then you misestimate something because you didn't know that you would have to accomplish this thing. That's an unknown that appeared, right? And now you're eating into your buffer time, and now it's so easy to spiral out of control in game dev because there are so many different factors that might apply to the implementation of a task. And I don't think there's any consensus of the best way to estimate time. But we'll see what Tim says. Maybe he has some good estimations or some good recommendations for estimations.
I'm going to talk
It's a tongue
about
twister.
what I consider to be a good way of making estimates
Yeah.
and problems of over and underestimating. Now, a lot of people have asked. The most recent request was from Aegon Targaryen 1390, who asked,
Shout out to Aegon.
"Can you please do a video on estimations and planning, and how to handle situations where the boss says it needs to be done in X days, and you say it will take 3X days?" Okay,
Okay, so before I jump into that mid-drawing, you said you would run a no estimate studio. It gets done when it gets done. The thing is, that usually only works when you have enough financial backing and understanding investors or a publisher that will just give you the an infinite amount of time to craft what you want crafted. But most of the time, you will have to have a milestone plan and the rough number of months or weeks or whatever that it will take for you to get from milestone to milestone and what's included in that milestone. So I think this is where the biggest issues arise, especially, I mean, it doesn't even matter if you're experienced at it or not. Sometimes you just don't know what the game is going to have. Let me back up a bit even more. The goal of pre-production, making your prototype, writing up some initial documentation, and deciding what the game is going to be. So like flavor, pillars, loop, features, technological limitations or desires. So like, do you want to support consoles? Do you want to support gamepad? Do you want to, how many players? Is it multiplayer? How do you do multiplayer? All these things are decided in pre-production so that you can then make the production plan as accurately as possible. But even if you do that, you might still have some issues. So, you might be a company that doesn't do much pre-production because maybe you're stupid like that, or you don't think you need to, and you're like, oh, well, we'll just wing it. And then it stumble upon unknown after unknown after unknown after unknown, and it will extend budget. And I've seen I've seen the scope of a game actually be cut back through development, even though the game was delayed by an additional year because it wasn't ready. And that was just because the studio didn't put enough time and effort into making a good prototype and a vertical slice and doing their pre-production properly. Although you could argue that vertical slice is a part of production, but either way, I think that those are all important milestones early on that if you don't spend the right time and effort and have the right criteria in mind for defining, you can simply go into production mode, start working on your alpha and beta, and just still be working on core systems and not have everything designed that you need to or pipelines made. And it's a disaster. It's an absolute disaster that will likely lead to crunch, delays, and very upset people. And probably a worse game off because of that. Prioritize and stack rank and just work from the top. You'll end up getting what you can get done. You might really like Kanban, the flow of like a Kanban board, which prioritizes and then people just you limit the amount of work that is done in a sprint or in a milestone based on that prioritization. Okay, you're well. So, but for people who don't know, that Kanban is one way of working where you're very limiting the scope of a sprint or a set of goals within the next week or 2 weeks, right, or something like that, as opposed to Jira, as opposed to more like certain like Scrum methodology that doesn't include a Kanban board where you kind of plan everything out beforehand and the exact amount of things that you will take within that 2 week period, and then you do those 2 week things. Kanban is more just like, okay, finish this thing, next thing, pull it in, priorities high, bug fix, done. Like a revolving door sprint. That's a perfect way to put it. And I'm not an expert on these certain methodologies, so note, take this with a grain of salt when I say that. But yeah, time estimation is important. Doing things properly is important. Pre-production is very chaotic. I mean, look at us. We've spent over a year working on the pre-production of Colton Chronicles, largely because it's a big game in terms of scope, and especially for one person only working on it full time. But the more work we put into it, the more things we can say, okay, I don't like this aspect, or we need to double down on this, and we can reconfigure our budget and the amount of time that we expect this will take to make based on those findings. So it is important to do.
One reason I put off answering this question for a long time is it's very, very complicated.
Yes, it is.
I remember when I first started in engineering school, this was in the 80s, a long time ago. In my first software engineering class, they talked about time to estimate writing code. And this had been something that had been a problem for decades already. Mm-hmm. IBM used to have issues with estimating programming tasks. And back then, there wasn't a whole lot of research into this. And also, there wasn't a whole lot of history of programming. And languages were being developed. Hardware was being developed. Everything was in a state of flux. The only thing I really remember from that class is there was a model called Kokomo, which the input was how many lines of code had to be written, and the output was an estimate in man months, which right then should tell you a lot of what era
Jesus
it was.
Christ.
But what was interesting, even then, a lot of people, including me, had questions to the professor like, wait a minute, it only took number of lines of code? How did you estimate that? How did you come up with the estimate of lines of code? It doesn't take into account the type of code being written, because as I can tell you right now, it takes me a lot longer to write 100 lines of UI code than 100 lines of gameplay system mechanic code.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same way with me too when I'm doing like blueprints. It's just systems I can do in no time at all, but other things like, writing dialogue, which you would think would be easier because it's just typing on the keyboard words that you already know or connecting up nodes. I mean, even speaking like one encounter, or one set of nodes for an NPC is really not that much in our game in terms of the number of nodes, but it takes me so long because it's not natural to me. So my time estimations are different than someone else's might be. And additionally, as a designer, when I'm writing up a document, it's really hard for me to estimate how long it's going to take for me to creatively understand what a game system should look like and how it should be structured. I haven't made it yet. I haven't thought about it yet. And it could be anything. I can make it as complex as I want in my mind, Therefore, I can't estimate what it's going to be like because I don't know what I'm trying to accomplish yet. So design, estimating like game design work is really tough. Estimating code work can be tough. Estimating art is sometimes a bit easier because it's often a little bit more quantifiable. Not to say that there aren't problems sometimes with estimating art, but usually the art teams that I've seen are the most accurate to estimate. And depending on the design work, designers are the worst to estimate. It is really hard for me to say, yes, I can have your system in a week. Because sometimes I don't know yet. I need to research competition. I need to think about how it's going to work within our game, within our pillars. I need to talk to team members and see what their ideas are and see if there's something that I'm missing or a hidden problem that if I do it in one way might really impact coding in a horrible way. So, catching those potential issues earlier is better. I might spend a week on just doing that initial research and writing down my notes before I even write up the document about how it should be accomplished or how the data should be structured. It can just be unknown. It can be really really unknown, and all of that is very undesired by managers who don't understand game development or especially game design. It's so hard to estimate time.
What about the experience of the programmer? Are you telling me a junior programmer writes 100 lines in the same amount of time as a
Exactly. Yep.
senior
Yep.
programmer? Or maybe if they write the same amount of code, are you telling me there are just as many bugs in both and they're both equally efficient? There are a lot of problems with this.
Not take all estimates are fake. I mean, they are fake. They're meant though to provide you with at least a rough min max of amount of time, right? So if you don't do any estimations, you're like, I don't know how fucking long it'll take. But at least if you are estimated correctly plus minus 20% of time, you have a window. You do have a window. But that all relies upon you stamping out as many unknown unknowns, or let's just say unknowns, as possible. We know in Colton Chronicles that we will need water and be able to swim in it. But based on my experiences with Fluid Flux, I don't know if we want to use that plugin. So that is a known unknown. And that's something that is a big question mark in terms of amount of time it will take to implement. Because we might have to make our own solution, we might have to find another solution, whatever. Why do you need the estimation? It's usually because some higher up wants to just have one for even higher up. Well, I mean, that's the reality is that when you have a daddy who you are suckling the teat of, usually a publisher and or investors, they want to know when they can expect to release this game. Now, in some fairness, especially with publishers, they need to know the window to release this on because they need to compare this with other games that are releasing in that time period. They need to set a date. They might need to make physical copies of that game and store them in a warehouse. That costs money. They need to know when to market and how to market. If any sales are coming up or any Steam event that would hinder the visibility of the game, any events where they need to showcase the game, so maybe like an award ceremony or a conference, things like that, and any conferences that you might need to go to show it off to like maybe PAX, to Gamescom, whatever. So sorry, knowing those windows is incredibly important, and time estimation is therefore the key to it. Although it's really hard to do.
So I just want to remind everybody this is a very complicated question. And it's different for programming and art and design and sound and
Yep.
literally any task you're going to do. I'm going to approach it a little more from the programming side because
Okay.
that's what I have the most experience doing. Let me also point out that this question is highly, highly, highly correlated with crunch because, like crunch, people tend to put the entire onus of the problem on one group, saying either the estimator is horrible or the manager is horrible for even asking for an estimate.
It's likely a combination of a lot of different factors. I mean, you could also, like I said, a lot of it, yes, it can be dependent on individuals sometimes, sure. But I think that in a lot of cases, with a relatively experienced group of people who are pretty good at knowing what they're doing, if the time estimates are really off, it likely speaks to an issue earlier on in production, probably pre-production, where they didn't stamp out enough of the unknowns, and so there's a lot of question marks in how long it will take to do something because they haven't even thought about that it was necessary in the first place. This might be the first time that the design team is bringing it up because they never made a proper vertical slice or prototype that included this system. Which is why, high level design is sometimes the easiest to do, but also the easiest to mess up. Because if you don't properly think about your high level design, even if you're writing a GDD, which is, mostly high level, or especially early on, it's high level, if you don't think about how those systems and mechanics are going to play together on a lower level at the time of writing the high level, you might make serious issues and problems for yourself later down the line when you realize, oh, wait, these two systems won't work well together, or they will, have a really horrible effect on the player's experience. But I can't remove this one because this one is dependent on it, and I didn't even think about that. Boom, massive unknown. You might have to add a new system. You might have to completely change something based on, from what it was in the prototype, or God forbid, the vertical slice. And now you have to then go back and redo all of the work that you did in the vertical slice part of the game. It happens. I mean, it happens. You just try to make sure that it doesn't happen as often as it might occur. Let me rephrase that. You try to do your best in pre-production to eliminate the cases where that might occur by prototyping, by testing things, and making sure that your design is really solid before jumping into the deep end and making your final product. And you might even see this on like a solo or indie developer level where they will just jump into making their game like from the start and not do any sort of pre-production or prototyping or testing the waters with things. And what that likely will lead to, depending on the complexity of the game being made, is an awful lot of refactoring, which adds scope, adds time, adds money, because that is money. Time is money. Refactoring is necessary, but if you're doing too much refactoring, you likely didn't do enough planning of what the game was supposed to be in the first place. Which is also the reason why when we go and make our vertical slice, we are shelving the prototype that we made and all of its code, and we are starting fresh with proper architecture so that we can take the mistakes and lessons that we learned and the places where we've painted ourselves into a corner, and we can do it properly so that the game is much easier to develop throughout alpha and beta. Sorry, rant ended. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Go on, Tim.
And we're talking about that. So, and of course, if you watched my channel for even just a week, you know that I'm going to give pros and cons and think that issues exist on both sides of that fence.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you can point the finger at anyone and go 100% of the blame is on this role.
Yep.
So, let me jump to early in my career. When I was first starting out, so this is me talking to all you junior programmers out there. I was usually given an estimate. So somebody would tell me, usually a senior programmer or somebody who was responsible for the project and the code, would give me an estimate and go, hey, I need you to do this. Here's how it works. I think it should take you a week. What I learned as a junior programmer was to ask questions. The first thing I'd ask is, why is the estimate a week? Can you tell me why you think it's a week?
Yeah, like where do you see the complexity? Where do you see presenting me with the most problems? And I think just asking why as a general is one of the most powerful questions you can ask in real life and in game development. And it isn't just for programmers. I also encourage designers to ask why. I mean, today we had the argument about grass, right? The one thing I wanted to address right away is why we have the grass the way it is. And also why we aren't going to be making it probably any different in the prototype. It's just, I can understand that some things in a prototype or freeze frame moment 502, Tim sees a bear, that's exactly what it is. Oh shit. Being able to explain why you've made a decision the way that it is doesn't mean that you think that decision is right. It just means here's the logical leaps and bounds that I made to connect from point A to point B. Now we can have a discussion so you can see exactly where I'm approaching, and maybe some of the context of how I got from here to here was missing in your feedback, right? So, And I mean, that goes into even feedback too, but I don't want to get into it. But just know that if you're a designer too, asking why is really important. Ask your lead, why are we implementing this? Why would the player want this? What is it going to do for the player experience? And even go deeper. They're really small questions you can ask your designer that if they can't answer those, you might have a problem. Certain things like, what's the percentage of time that this new system is going to, or how much time in percentage is the player going to be spending in this system or in this menu, just so that you can gauge how much of the time it's going to be pacing the player, and that percentage also affects complexity of the system, right? So yes, I could make our alchemy as deep and crazy as potion craft, but then the percentage of time that the player spends in potion making is going to go up dramatically to like 80% of the gameplay is going to be spent making potions. And that's fun, but not in a game that has so many other things to it, like fishing, farming, exploring, dungeons, talking to NPCs, right? And learning about their stories and helping them out, or reading books, or in general, just exploration. So I need to carefully manage the percentage of time that I want alchemy to take versus the amount of time that it is taking for players when we do play testing. So there's really, really simple questions that you can ask a game designer, and probably pretty similar to programmers that Tim will say, that can help you to identify, are you doing things the right way? Are you doing things the wrong way? Are you thinking about it from a different position than the vision and likely game director expect you to be thinking about it from? It's very, very easy to make a game overly complex. It is much harder to make a game that has depth, but is simple to get into and simple to understand.
Normally they'd say, well, I've done this before. It took me a week. And I would frequently say, could I get a breakdown by day? And the advantage for that is if they break it down by day, it not only is broken down into much more constructive, understandable tasks,
Yeah, like kind
but
of
you also know immediately if you're
what you
going
expect to have done at that point.
off estimation. If at the end of the first day you haven't finished the first day's tasks, you're probably not going to finish this in a week.
And you can communicate that too. And so having, yeah, I think the day breakdown goal is really smart. And it could probably be done similarly for design too, although programmers, I definitely see the benefit of where, okay, I didn't complete my tasks that you said I should be able to finish in a day. I'm going to communicate that so that maybe we can fix that estimation and see if there's enough time left in the sprint, or if maybe there was a miscommunication, maybe the programmer thought it would be, easier to do. Just communicate that. And so having those early indicators that something is going wrong is also part of estimation, where you can say, okay, we expected to have these features done by this milestone. We're not going to have this feature done. Let's go to the publisher. Let's go to the team or whatever. Let's communicate that and say, okay, Mr. Publisher, we're not going to have this feature done. What are our options, right? Can we move this? Can we push the game back, by 2 weeks to accommodate for this? We have 3 months of buffer allotted. Let's eat up 2 weeks of those buffers to, push this milestone back by 2 weeks, right? Buffers are important.
Big tasks that I would say, if you're given a task that's a week, or even I've been given tasks before that are a month or 3 months.
Jesus.
Try to get those broken down into daily and sometimes even hourly. Sometimes things can be broken down into hourly. Like, here's something, shouldn't take you more than 2 hours. And that way, if it took you all day to do that, something's wrong. It could be something's wrong with you. You didn't understand the task. You're just not very experienced, or the language doesn't have support calls that you're used to. You didn't know these library functions existed.
Here's a good example too. I even kind of do this subconsciously, although this should be handled a bit more officially. In our branches for our game, I can see how long it takes us to implement different things. For instance, let's see, farming was added in the course of like 3 days. I can see also similar things like fishing minigame was made over the course of a week. And it took me, 1 day to add fishing content and farming content or sounds. A lore bookshelf was a few days. So I can kind of see the things that I am really good at doing very fast. And then the things that maybe take me a bit more time. Fluid flux, writing dialogue. We can see the merchant we've spent, nearly, what is this, like 2 weeks on? Yeah. So I can see the things that I know I thought would be easier, but I am not good at doing them. And the things that I am much better at doing much faster, and those things that will take less time. So, you kind of do it subconsciously too, especially if you're more experienced and you know your own uh, strengths and weaknesses. My strength, systems, weakness, dialogue, or anything that requires me to do artwork.
Maybe it's on the manager. Maybe they were mistaking it. Maybe they were thinking of another task.
Mm-hmm.
So you try to figure that out. Um, the nice thing about this, about breaking it down into smaller tasks, like I mentioned, is if things go off, and I mentioned going, you're taking too much time, but even if you take too little time, this is something you get to know soon and before a lot of time is spent. And yes, it's good to know. If somebody tells you this should take all day and you get it done in an hour,
That's good.
you need to communicate that
Yes,
because something.
yes, because maybe there was a miscommunication, and maybe you're better at doing that sort of task, and that can also help your production team, or if you probably only have one producer or two, to know, okay, in the future, and your lead, these sorts of tasks, if we need them done really quickly, we can give them to Tim. Or if we want to help train others who are a bit slower and we have the time, we can give them those tasks so that they can become more proficient. Or if we assign a task like that to another person, we can team them up with Tim in like a strike team, and Tim can help this other person understand the basics of implementing those systems better. So yeah, you need to communicate not only if you're slow, but Tim's right, if you're fast too, because that can be a benefit, but it can also it can mess with the timeline. It's not that that it's a bad thing being too fast, but that it will mean that you're completing milestones quicker, and maybe you need to adjust the amount of tasks that are being given to you in that sprint. And so the producer knows, okay, we can give this person a bit more to do versus this other person because they really specialize in making those systems.
Happened here. Either they misestimated the task, or maybe you didn't do the right thing. Maybe
That
they
too,
thought
yeah.
you were going
That's
to
possible.
write the final function and have a lot more support and a lot more error checking and have it be efficient, and you just did the most basic task ever, and it's really slow and it doesn't check any of its parameters for errors.
Mm-hmm.
So communication is a huge thing. Let me give you an example of one of the very first things I did. It was in the second game I ever made, Bard's Tale construction set. I was given that, and I was told it would take 14 weeks to do the entire thing. Now, this was only the second game I'd ever done. And so even though I was the, quote, lead programmer, I still felt very inexperienced. I'd done one game before, and it was a bridge card game. So I tried to ask questions about, hey, why do you think it would only take 14 weeks? And one of the responses I was given was, well, most of the effort is going to be in combat, and combat you can pull out of one of the previous games because they're effectively a black box. Let me tell you what I discovered. Two things wrong with what I was told. One, it wasn't a lot of time spent in combat. A big chunk of the time was spent in, you guessed it, UI, and as a subset of that, we had animating creatures in the UI, and I didn't know how to do that.
That is, like either at a point that is if he knew about it before, that's a known unknown, right? Or if he didn't know that that needed to be accomplished, that's an unknown unknown. And that's one of the scariest things, is that you will just be working on your game and you're like, oh shit, we need this thing. I didn't know we needed it. I don't know how we do it. And so those are the ones that you can't even begin to estimate, because at least if you know, okay, we need spinning animated creatures in our UI, you can sit there and say, okay, well, we know we need it, so let's apply some arbitrary amount of time that we think it will take, and we'll put some tasks away to research what it will take to accomplish that, right? We'll prototype it or something. Yeah, that's scary. And UI is one of the things that I often see as one of the most misestimated, or let's just say wrongly estimated things in game development, because it can take a long time to make really good, clean, polished, good feeling UI for a game, especially if it has a lot of complex mechanics or data that needs to show. Sorry. I'm getting really dry throat. Or things that the players need to click on, and you need to account for tons of different possibilities when the player is clicking on different buttons or opening different menus. It's really, really hard. It's a lot of logical and organizational work that if you don't get right the first time and you make the art for it, then art needs to go back to it and, you know, remake the UI, and then you need to get QA on it. Maybe there are new sounds that need to be added to it as well. There's new text now, and now you need to go and send that off to the localization team. It just all adds up fast, and the complexity is out of control sometimes.
Barely knew how the graphics mode worked.
Yeah,
Putting delta compressed animation frames and rendering them at a particular frame rate was outside my skill set. Also, the first thing I did when I got home from that meeting, because I was a contractor, I was working at home, I dove into combat and I discovered it was not a black box. The combat code was filled with things like if monster equals dragon, then actually what it said was if monster type equals 52, and I had to go figure out what 52 They didn't even bother using enums.
Oh my god.
It was a little bit of a nightmare code.
Yeah.
I talk about this in the Bard's Tale construction set
Type equals
video
52.
Anyway, so I was back a day or two later going, this is not what you said it was.
By the way, that exact example of monster type equals 52, this is exactly why Tim also has a video on this, but it's something I can kind of word in my own words. This is why you prototype, right? This is why you in my opinion, the best scenario, the proper way to do it is to make your prototype, make your first playable, and then start from scratch for vertical slice. You can do the monster type equals 52 in the prototype as long as you know when you're making the game, you might want to make it, you know, give it a proper enum, right? And say monster type equals dragon. But you can do it in the prototype because it's faster. You should be able to fail fast and get things done quickly in the prototype, because if your game isn't fun there, you're not magically going to have a fun game when you start entering production. It's not going to exist. But in the same realm, you don't want to spend so much time making perfectly modular code that you never get your game done. And there's a lot of, I see indie developers, solo developers, and even big studios suffer in this same realm where they need everything to be perfect. Because if one case is off, if one case handles this system, it goes through the system differently, then that system needs to be redesigned and refactored. Go back to the drawing board. One more week of development for it. Or that one case, just do a branch. Just do an if statement. If this thing equals this one case that breaks the rules, do something specific. So, I think Tim said it in his video. I think he has a video about it. Code the rules, script the exceptions, right? Or something like that. I might be paraphrasing. So you want to make really good systems that can handle most of the data, but it's okay to come across something that instead of refactoring and wasting 2 weeks of your time, just put the exception in. But if just know that every time you do that, you will incur some debt that at some point you might have to pay off. Just be aware of that. It's a balancing act between efficiency and perfect code, and usually in game development, efficiency wins.
And luckily, because I could back it up, I go, you said it was a black box? Look at this code. Look at this code. Look at this function. This is not a black box. And also I pointed out some things like, you want some things done that are outside my skill set. They did get an extra programmer put in. Phil Britt came on board to handle a lot of that animation stuff. Some of the estimates were changed. So communication.
Yeah, communicate too if you're not able to do something. I mean, I know that that's probably the biggest point of vulnerability for junior developers is that they don't often feel confident admitting that they don't know how to do something because they feel as if it will make them look like worse developers, and therefore they should be replaced with somebody who does know how to do it. Just note that that's a really toxic way to think, and try not to think that way. In a lot of cases, it is way more complicated and time-consuming, costly for a business to replace you than it is to teach you that thing. So admit, like, I don't know how to do that. Can you show me how? And that often, not only will it make you seem less replaceable because you are very open to learning, but you will learn at a much faster rate than if you just dive into it. But if you're also somebody that is maybe built a bit differently, and you say, you know what, I don't know how to do this, but can you give me 3 hours? I'm going to try and figure it out myself. And in 3 hours, I'll come back to you. I'll let you know. And if not, can you set aside some time to help teach me how to do it? That way you can communicate that you are a self-starter, you try to learn on your own, and you're not afraid of jumping into a challenge. But worst case scenario, you might need to come and discuss it and figure out what you're not getting. That's fair too.
Now, later in your career, when you're a more experienced programmer, let's say you're a senior programmer, you're
Ooh,
not a lead
nice.
yet, you're a senior programmer, you're the one who's asked to give estimates. You're given a task and said, hey, how long do you think this is going to take to do? Here's what I recommend you do. And
Okay.
by the way, it's totally fair. You're an experienced programmer, you're a senior. It is absolutely fair to ask you to estimate things.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing I do is compare the task you've been asked to do to ones you've done before. If you've done ones like that before, then base your estimate on those previous tasks because now you know how long it took you to do these things.
But you're also usually estimating them for people who are below you, juniors, right? If you're in a senior position, likely you have, somebody who's a regular or a junior or associate, whatever the term that you want to use is, and you need to be aware of their skill set too, and that's important because everybody has different skill sets. Everybody has different ways of learning or reviewing code or communicating, and so you might need to adjust estimations for those individuals as well.
If you haven't done tasks like this before, you're back to your manager and going, I've never done anything like this before. Why do you think it will take this long? Why don't we break it down?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we break them down into hourly or daily tasks and I'll start on it and I'll get back to you after the first day and tell you how things are going. There should be absolutely no reason they shouldn't accept that. Now, keep in mind that part of a manager's job is to push back on you and try to get the most accurate estimate possible. A lot of you get angry when managers do that, as if you don't understand that's their job. They're trying to schedule a project. There isn't an infinite flow of money.
Nope.
There isn't an infinite number of people who can come into the project and rescue things that are getting behind.
Yep.
So things have to be estimated. That's just the world.
You have to be honest
So
too. You really have to be honest. I've worked with people that would rather hide the fact that they don't know how to do something or they don't have the skill set just to like save themselves and make themselves look better or not look worse and maybe the most realistic expectation. So you just have to be honest because again, he's right. It's their job, and if you can't meet a budget or a schedule for a milestone, your publisher might withhold payment for that milestone, and that affects everybody. And so you being pigheaded or being stuck up or not being honest could affect everybody's salary for the next week or two or even longer. I've seen in some cases. You don't want to be you never want to be in that situation. That is a game developer's worst nightmare. Unfortunately, I've been in that scenario where I haven't been able to get paid, or I think it was a month. I've had friends here in Poland who have not gotten paid sometimes for 3 to 6 months. It is horrible. And maybe Poland is a bit more of an extreme of an example, but it happens and it sucks. That's why estimating is so important. That's why doing pre-production is important. I will not back down. I will avidly defend and criticize anyone who says that pre-production is not important. It is the most important phase of development, if you ask me. And you know what? You want a boring alpha and beta. You want an alpha and beta where you know what you need to do. It just takes time. It's a bunch of tedious work. Good. It better boring than completely chaotic, lacking in any sort of estimation or metrics, and resulting in crunch and potentially, salaries that aren't getting paid. And you do that by just, asking why, being knowledgeable, being experienced, taking things as they come, sometimes being adaptable and doing good pre-production work.
it's always possible to give estimates, but it isn't always possible to give an accurate one. But you have to try. And the reason for this is unless you're an indie, the money's coming from somewhere. Those people want to know, and they have a right to know. They're funding this project.
Yep.
They're paying you. Saying you can't give an estimate and how dare they ask you is a little bit. I don't know. I wouldn't want to work with somebody like that.
No,
It,
publishers don't. I mean, they're the client. They're giving you money to make a game. They may not own the IP, but they own that game in almost every case. That is their game. By lying to them, you are lying to the client. And I promise you that will resound. If the moment they know that you are willing to lie to them or mislead them, they will lose almost all trust in you completely. And therefore, when you need them the most, when you need them to be gracious to you, or maybe just, okay, delay the milestone, but don't delay payments, please. They might not do it because they just don't trust you, they don't like you. You have not been a good you've not been a good, contractor in this case, I guess you'd almost say, with that sort of business arrangement. So I promise you, publishers just want to know the truth. And the more truthful you are, even if you admit that we misestimated this milestone, it's going to take 2 more weeks. The sooner you can say that, the sooner that they can adapt for it. Simple as that. Just be honest.
It's basically saying, hey, I know better than you about running a project. And my idea of running a project is just seat of the pants and we'll see what happens. That's not going to be a very good project. So the problem is, I want to talk too about the separate issues of what happens when you underestimate and what happens when you overestimate. So let's say you're given a task and you underestimate how long it will take. Basically, you're going to run out of time. There are 3 things that I've seen this lead to. One, you go to people, you have to go to your manager and go, look, I'm not going to have this feature done. So they may have to yank the feature out of the game. This is why, as a designer, I said I've often had design fallbacks as part of my design doc to try to account for this. But if it happens too much, the game is going to become significantly worse. You're going to ship a game where people who are playing the game, they don't know anything about the process. They're just going to go, I can't believe they don't have sorting in the inventory.
I've been in that situation. I've been in that exact situation. In one of the games, I had designed, the game quite thoroughly. It was a lot of work, but I had done it, and we had to remove so many features and little aspects of those systems that the game was definitely a very bare bones compared to what it should have been, but also I had to adapt in the moment and find ways to not make that feature suck ass, which wasn't always possible. It was just like, okay, well, now at this point we are developing a completely different game than was originally designed. And it took me a long time to figure out how and why that was the case. What was the scenario that led to that? Well, it wasn't misestimating this feature necessarily, and I kept going back and back and back. And what it turned out to be was it was at its core time estimation problems. We had in the calendar determined that, let's just say, February 1st, right? It's coming up in a week, right? February 1st is our vertical slice. Well, we're not close to our vertical slice in terms of qualification statements. How do you define a vertical slice? Is it a date in the calendar, or is it a set of criteria that must be met in order for the game to be in a certain position that you feel confident moving towards the alpha with? And in our case, we had defined it as a date in the calendar, that the milestone expectation by the publisher was that date, or a vertical slice. So instead of actually creating a proper vertical slice, we created, sorry, my voice is starting to go here. We had just scripted certain things to occur, sorry. Oh God, okay, I can't talk for too long. But we had set up that date in the calendar, and it just came and went, and we didn't have any qualifying statements for what the vertical slice should look like, so it was just a bunch of scripted mess and placeholder things behind the scenes that to the publisher looked fine. But when you really knew what it was beneath that surface, it was horrible. It was a mess, and we didn't know the pipeline. And then it just compounded from there. So now instead of working on milestone 1 feature A, we're working on finishing up vertical slice feature that wasn't finished by the time vertical slice came around. And so now this milestone here, another date in the calendar, we were just preparing the bare bones barely functioning system of milestone 1 feature A, and it just kept compounding and compounding all of the unknowns and missed estimations because we failed to do pre-production properly. And that's how you earn yourself a bare husk of a featureful game that was still even then delayed by a year. You don't want to be in that position, I promise you. It will not make a good game, and you will have spent like 3 years making something that could have been so much more had the proper care and effort been taken earlier on in the project. Ooh, sorry, I'm getting ranty on this, but I have just a lot of personal experience and, friends who've experienced issues because of time estimation, and it really spirals out of control.
I can't believe they don't have tagging inventory items for selling them. I can't believe they don't have junk items in their own
I hope we're doing
category. Good. If you ran out of time doing that inventory UI, that's why it's like that.
Yep.
Remember I said the answer to everything is money. Another thing when you run out of time is you may have finished it, but you didn't have really a chance to look at it. Bugs. So basically, the work for that task, which should have been done when you created it, would you just kick the can down the road, as one of my producers like to say, and now there's bugs. You turn it in and go, it's done.
It's I mean, you estimate, okay, it's going to take me 1 week to implement this system. Well, the amount of time that it takes to quality test that feature is also part of the budget and the time frame, and you will inevitably have bugs that will then have to be fixed. So you can estimate how long it will take for you to make the game, strong air quotes on this one for anybody who's got me on the background, but that doesn't include time spent fixing the problems from making the game, which is why you usually have that buffer period, or ideally that's kind of what a beta is. Where the game is made, you're now polishing it up, you're bug fixing. Ideally, that's what a beta is. So if you ever see like a beta version of a game where it's like, oh my god, it's still missing features, it's probably not a beta version of a game. That's still it's still like alpha, and maybe they're didn't properly make their vertical slice, so they're kind of extending their vertical slice into their alpha, and now it's just a whole mess. So realistically, again, your alpha, if you do your vertical slice and your pre-production of your prototype properly, your vertical slice should be pretty smooth, but still, you're still figuring some things out, still finalizing how certain aspects should look, and then you use that as like a template of quality and completion to make your alpha, right? And that should be just a lot of tedious work and maybe some slight changes and fixes to how something looks or how something feels or the balance of something. But balance is really not a focus of alpha anyway, that's beta. And then your beta is like just, okay, grindstone, bug fix, polish, bug fix, polish. Ideally, that's how it is.
But you really have no idea how stable it is, or if it's causes the frame rate to drop. Mm-hmm. Basically, also, QA is going to find bugs associated or that lead directly back to the code you just wrote.
Optimization.
And then, of course, the third big bugaboo here is crunch. You underestimating a task is going to cause crunch later. If it's a feature that cannot be removed, even if it doesn't lead to bugs, but you need to finish it, you or someone else is going to have to do that work. This is going to cause crunch. Either the game is going to run over time or you're going to work overtime. Something is going to happen because of you underestimating how long it would take to do that. Now, so this leads to an interesting thing where a lot of people go, I'm going to be clever and I'm going to overestimate it. So if I think it's going to take a week, I'm going to say 4 weeks. I call this the Star Trek Scotty method, where he always used to tell Captain Kirk, you want that done in an hour? I can't do it. I can't do accents. And then he does it in 10 minutes. Well, this sounds clever, and you may be patting yourself on the back going, yeah, I'm always getting stuff done faster. But it leads to two things. One, if you give a big estimate for something, they may not even ask you to do it. They may just drop the feature.
Yeah.
They may just go to a fallback because you said it would take too long. This has happened on my games where I asked for a feature as a designer. I got a really big estimate back. I thought it was wrong, but I'm like, I'm not going to push back on that because I've pushed back it in the past and been told I'm a bad manager. So I just dropped the feature and went to one of my fallbacks. Game shipped. People were like, why didn't this feature exist? Then, later on, I've had a programmer go, oh, guys, we figured out we could have done that. Okay.
Again, this is why you prototype, right? you just determine like, okay, is this going to take as long as I think it will take? And in some cases, no. It's like I thought farming in our game would take a lot more time than it did. I mean, it's a prototype, right? So it's not like it's feature full complete or lacking in any visual bugs or it's perfectly balanced in any way. Um, but prototyping, I thought it would be a lot harder. And it's like, oh no, it's actually pretty modular in itself and doesn't really seem to impact anything else. We tie it into the day, night, and weather system, and the biomes. We just place those normally. So yeah, it's actually not too bad. Lesson learned. I That took a lot less time than I thought. FRS, thank you for the free silent. FR silent. Thank you for the follow. Game is broken in a few ways. For instance, the pause menu, input menu that breaks the game. Oof. The issues that come from estimating. Everyone lies to each other. We're currently experiencing a lot at this in my job. Yeah, I mean people do. It's just one of those things where you're working not only with a like this kind of a black box in terms of um, what the game actually needs to be in like not only its foundational state, like the code architecture and the design, but also what it needs to present to the player and the fidelity, the amount of assets within it, right? Because it's one thing to make a system, it's another to determine how much of the game's scope that system is going to take, right? So how many ingredients are you going to have, right? And at a certain point is scaling down the amount of uh, crops in like Stardew now just completely botching the entire purpose of the game. Oh, well, we only have enough crops to fit in springtime. So why do we have seasons at this point, right? So it's like you can accurately estimate the amount of time that it's going to take for systems, maybe, but then even if you can do that, you need to accurately estimate how much of the game, how much of the scope of that game is that going to be taken up, and what assets do we need for that? Okay, we have a crop. Is there a different sound when you pick up that crop? Is there a different animation than when you pick up that crop? What can you do with this crop that might be special and unique? Maybe it's a pumpkin and you can do certain things with it. You can carve it. You can display it as a as a decorational item. And all these things will then add in that complexity and the scope to the game. And it can creep up real fast. Sorry, my voice is starting to go for today.
Too late. Feature got dropped. Players were disappointed. That's because you overestimated a task.
Mm-hmm.
But here's another thing that can happen. Let's say a task is assigned to you and you come back and go, yeah, you said it's going to take a week. It's really going to take me 4 weeks. There's a chance your manager will go, okay, don't do that. And they give you other tasks to do instead. And you think it's being dropped. Instead, the task is given to another developer. And let's say they do it in a week. And they're the same level as you. Like you're both.
That's going to raise a lot of questions about your work ethic or your time estimation ability, or even the fact that you might be lying. Like you might have just accidentally thought that it might take 4 weeks, but you just didn't catch something. Well, you can say that and you might be believed, but if it happens too much, people will subconsciously start thinking that you are a liar and you're doing it to not work as hard as everybody else. And that breeds a lot of toxic feelings beneath the surface. That you don't want that. You don't want that.
Juniors or both seniors. Well, guess what? You just got revealed as being someone who pads their estimates, and that is not a good look for you. You may think, well, I was just being cautious. Yeah, but you almost cost us a feature because you thought it was clever to quadruple all your time estimates.
Being cautious is like saying, look, I think I can do this in a week. I need to talk with the other programmers to see, if my thoughts on this are accurate. I mean, usually you do that during planning anyway, right? That's why you have all the I think actually that's called grooming. And before you get too worried, wee woo, FBI open up. Grooming in this case is where you talk about the complexity of a task that you're planning to take with everyone else. It's kind of like an open forum, and that's where you can say, okay, well, hold on, over there. If we do it this way, I think you won't have to take a week. You could probably get it done in 3 days. And then consensus, disagreements, maybe a different way. Hey, hold on, it'll only take 2 days if you do it this way. Then you do the proper task creation, you write it up, and you set that estimate. And that's where you can then jump into it. So, if you're just going up to a random junior developer and saying, how long do you think this will take? And they they don't really know, right? Because you don't want juniors estimating tasks because they don't know. They probably haven't done it before. Um, but you do need to have some conversation about it, right? Like a meeting or a talk or that dedicated time where you talk about the tasks that you would like to take in that sprint and talk about with other knowledgeable individuals, like senior individuals or people on that same skill level, to determine what it's going to, what's going to be possible within that 2 week time period.
Both of these things, you being the reason features are dropped, or you being the reason, or you being discovered as someone who's padding their estimates that other people can do much faster than you, these are not good for you because they lead to a reputation that either you work on games that don't review well or you're just a bad game developer. Trust me, you work on enough games, your reputation will build.
Yep.
And both of these things will come back to you. And I see a lot of people like, no, it wasn't my fault. It was something else. They didn't explain it to me right. That's fine if you're a junior, but if once you've gotten up to staff or senior level, that excuse holds a lot less water. And if there's other people who are doing better work than you, okay, maybe these things you say are true, but I have these other people who can do the work. So it's tough to under or overestimate. If you're padding your stuff, it's bad. If you're trying to just give really low ball estimates because you want to make your manager happy, it's bad. So what is the TLDW, which is probably too late because I'm already at 15 minutes.
It's okay.
Here's
what worse.
my recommendation for you. You've been asked to do a task. Try to understand what that task is. Ask questions. Compare it to tasks you've done before.
Prototype.
Understand it as much as you can before you return.
Yeah, especially if it's something more complex, just say to the producer, like, hey, do we have time for me to spend a day or half a day doing a rough prototype or a bit of research on how long this task is going to take me? Or take the team, right? Because maybe it's like a lead who's going to be doing that research and estimation because they're a bit faster, they know how to implement things faster. And then you can deliver that and say, okay, I've done some of the initial complex work. Here are my findings. Here's what I think we should use, or maybe we should buy a plugin because it'll be easier to use this than making our own system. Whatever, do that because sometimes you might be told from the design team, hey, we need to implement this system, and the design might be lacking or something. It's like, okay, well, here's what we'll do. We need to prototype this. And then we can eliminate some of the unknowns and jump into developing the entire system with a lot better estimation. Because right now, I can tell you 1 week, I can tell you 4 weeks. I don't know because I haven't determined what the problems with implementing this might be.
Estimate.
By the way, sorry to pause again, having a dedicated code architect can be really useful for, because that is the person that is in charge of managing that, just the architecture of the of the raw code, and they can kind of give really, really knowledgeable detailed pointers about, okay, I know for sure this system will need refactoring if we want to make this system. It just will need to happen. And then they can maybe bring in the programmer that worked on the system or helped with it and give an estimation of how long it might take to refactor that, and talk with the design team about, well, what are our needs for this new system that might need to be impacted here.
Do that. Try to get big tasks broken down. If you have a month task, try to get it down to a daily. Sometimes you may even want to break it down to an hourly task, especially if it's something you've never done before. Try to get smaller tasks so early on, are you going off? Either are you doing it faster or slower? If you're doing it faster, hey, maybe that's great. Or maybe you misunderstood what it was. If you're doing it slower, that's not good. And again, maybe you misunderstood what it was. So try to get those tasks done.
Just a side note too regarding overestimating tasks. You might sell to a publisher the milestone plan that is really accomplishable, and you might be able to get all of your second milestone features complete before the first milestone is even ended. That can also be kind of dangerous because now the publisher might think that you purposefully sold them a 3-year project that will only take you 2 years to complete. And so what are you doing asking for so much money? So Like you said, you can try to play tricks, but sometimes those tricks will come back to bite you in the ass, and that can go for your team as well as for the publishers or investors. Now, it's not to say that having extra time is a bad thing, but you need to very carefully sell when and where that extra time is going to take place.
Done in a much finer granularity. And then the last one, which should be obvious from everything I've just said, is communicate. Talk to your manager. Talk about delays or the rare, hey, I got ahead of things. I finished this in an hour and it was supposed to take all day. Maybe they can look at it and go, wow, you're awesome. Or maybe they look at it and go, this doesn't do half the stuff we talked about. Communication. It's tough. I get that a lot of people in the game industry are introverts. You're looking at one, but you have to learn to do it.
Yep.
Communication is two-way, so you can't just blame your manager for lack of communication. It's kind of on both of you. So, TLDW, understand the task, get it broken down as granular as possible, and then communicate with the person who gave you the task.
I'm very introverted as well. It can be tough. I mean, it's less a problem I think if you're introverted than if you have like actual social communication problems. Maybe people who are a little bit on like the autism spectrum, maybe a little bit of Asperger's or something like that. Um, all of those things can affect the way that somebody will take good feedback, bad feedback, recommendations, or even the way that they process emotions or negative things that occur within the company, and maybe some bad news about the company's financials or something. It is tough, and remote work has made that quite difficult, or at least changed the reality in the way that people communicate. You can't just go out for a lunch, and talk with a couple of your other leads and have a casual conversation and bonding moment. Now people have lunches on their own, and they just eat at their desk sometimes, and that too can be unhealthy. That too can impact efficiency. So, yeah, communication is even more important than ever, especially with remote teams, and there are some pretty good recommendations. I think there was I don't remember the name of the game, but there was a good video I watched about a talk with a indie developer. It was like that, that like if you look at like medieval pictures, and it was like a game that was based on those pictures. If somebody knows the name, I'd love to hear it. I don't remember the name, but he had a really good talk about how he set up his team's communication and little tips and tricks that they figured out moving from in studio work to completely remote work. So just know that it is very different, and you're not going to reach, I think, the same level of efficiency all perfectly. It could take a week. Just say it could maybe be done in 1 to 3 weeks, maybe more than what I would say. Tell them I would tell a 1 to 4 or 2 to 7. Do you mean that you would purposely overestimate the task? Because I think that Tim's right that does lead to a problem. But I think that having maybe I think that if you have such a large range of this could take 1 to 4 weeks or 2 to 7, indicates too that you have not thoroughly thought about the complexity and scope of what you're making. And that can be a red flag for publishers and investors, and that can be a red flag for your team as well. And that's probably where you would want to sit down and do like a talk with the leads about, okay, if I have a system that I'm thinking of for a game and I don't know what is accomplishable, right? Because maybe it's so out of the box that I don't know what kind of work is going to be needed from the art team or from the programmers. Have a meeting and say, here's my notes. Here's what I want to accomplish. The next 1 hour, our goal is to trim down the complexity and allow me, the designer, to write a better document about what it's going to be, and to give you guys a bit of a heads up of what to expect and to think about. So if we end this call and you guys go on your own work and you think, oh wait, there's gonna be a red flag with this, now you know to talk to me, right? So designers should not just design in the background in this echo chamber where they don't talk to anybody. You should do it out in the open, and you should talk with other team leads or other team members of what you're planning to do and what you're leaning towards to catch those potential red flags much quicker. It's an awful lot of work.
That is the best advice I can give people on time estimation. So I hope Aegon Targaryen 1390, this answered your questions.
Shout out to Aegon. Yeah, that was a great video by Tim, and hopefully I provided some additional context on that too. Estimating is and always will be probably one of the biggest challenges for game developers out there. Anybody who says they can do it well is probably lying, unless they just make the same types of games over and over and over again, right? Like it's an asset flip kind of game. Stop giving into estimating. Don't do it. Estimating is still important, and especially if you're going to work in professional game development, you will need to be good at estimating. You will not get money from a publisher if you can't estimate, and if you somehow convince them to give you money, you're not going to get it again if you fail to estimate properly, because you are going to cost them time and money and stress and gray hairs, and you might cost their investors money, and that's going to hurt everybody's bottom line. Be the change you want to see. All I think is just like get good, get better at estimating, get good. This one time did it in a day and told them it was faster than I thought it'd be, but a 1 to 4 is actually giving them that the time it would take. Yeah, I mean it happens. I thought things would be much faster too. In fact, I thought that writing dialogue, when we first wrote Spoon's dialogue way back sometime, I don't know when we wrote his dialogue, I thought it would be a lot quicker than it was, and it wasn't. It was a long time. It took us like a month to write all of Spoon's encounters and bug fix it. And even then, we had to go back and refactor it for the effect overhaul, and that added more complexity. So, yeah, I mean, I learned a lot about that, and I learned that we need to prioritize getting good, fast, knowledgeable, experienced writers more than I thought we would need. And I've adjusted the budget because of that, and I might adjust it again because of that before we do our next pitches. We'll see. So if you guys want to give that video a like and watch, go do that, please, because Tim is the real content creator here. We are just enjoying his content and allowing it to further our own discussions. And Tim, again, thank you for giving us permission to do these reactions. I really appreciate that. And hopefully, if you ever see these, I hope you enjoy them. And I hope we don't have any big problems. But I'd love to. I'd also love to talk with you at any time if you ever wanted to come on and just chat game design and game development as a casual sort of thing. I'd always be open to that. Dialogue my sound system, but when you're making a game where it has a big system, it would be a long time. Yeah, I mean, easy dialogue I think is pretty quick to do, but when dialogue is like when it's RPG branching dialogue, wow, I did not expect that would take so long. And I know that I'm not good at it too, so I am much slower than somebody who's good and experienced at it, but also I know now what it's going to take in terms of complexity and in terms of organizational thought necessity. Okay, so I won't babble on for any longer. If you're watching YouTube, thank you for watching that one, and I will see you on the next one or on the next live stream if you visit those. So take care, YouTube. Bye bye. Thank you for watching.